Long, long ago, when the world was still filled with magic and the gods walked among mortals, there lived a king and queen who longed for a child. At last, the gods blessed them with a daughter more beautiful than the dawn. They named her Psyche, which means soul, for her beauty was not just of the body, but of the heart. Now, Psyche had two sisters, pretty enough, but nowhere near as radiant as their youngest sibling. As the years passed, word of Psyche's beauty spread across the land. People traveled from distant kingdoms just to glimpse her, whispering that she must be a goddess in mortal form. Here's where the trouble began, my dear friends. You see, when people saw Psyche, they didn't just admire her, they worshipped her. They left flowers at her feet instead of at Aphrodite's temples. They prayed to her for love and happiness, forgetting the true goddess of beauty entirely. And Aphrodite? Oh, she noticed. The goddess peered down from Mount Olympus, her perfect lips curling in fury. "How dare this mortal girl steal my glory?" she hissed. "Does she think herself my equal?" Her temples stood empty, her altars gathering dust, all because of one human princess. And Aphrodite, proud and vain as only a goddess can be, would not let this stand. So she called upon her son, Eros, the mischievous winged god of love. "Go," she commanded, "and make that arrogant girl fall in love with the most hideous, wretched creature alive. Let her suffer as I have suffered." Eros, ever the dutiful son, took his golden bow and flew down to earth, ready to do his mother's bidding. But fate, my friends, has a way of laughing at even the gods' plans. For when Eros laid eyes on Psyche, something unexpected happened. As he hovered above her sleeping form, the moonlight caught Psyche's face just so. Her lips were parted in quiet dreams, her chest rising and falling like gentle waves. And Eros, oh, Eros hesitated. His fingers trembled, the arrow slipped, and oh, the sharp point pricked his own heart instead. A gasp, a flutter of wings, and just like that, the god of love fell hopelessly, desperately in love with a mortal. Isn't that the way of things? Even gods aren't safe from their own magic. Now, Eros was no fool. He knew his mother would never allow this. So he whispered to the west wind, "Zephyrus, carry her away, but gently, oh so gently." And so Psyche woke in a palace of gleaming marble and golden light, where fountains sang and invisible hands laid out feasts fit for the gods. But here was the rule. "You may enjoy all this," a voice in the darkness told her, for Eros hid his face, "but never, ever look upon me." Psyche, though curious, agreed, and for a time she was happy. But back in her homeland, Psyche's two sisters, green with envy, convinced the people she'd been stolen by a monster. And when they visited her grand palace, they dripped poison in her ear. "Why won't he show his face? What is he hiding?" That night, Psyche took a lamp and a dagger to her husband's bedside, and what she saw would change everything. That fateful night, she stood trembling beside her sleeping husband, the oil lamp in one hand and a dagger in the other. The voices of her sisters hissed in her memory, "What if he's a serpent? A demon? What if he means to devour you at dawn?" As golden light spilled over the bed, there lay no monster, but the most beautiful being she'd ever seen. Wings like sunlit clouds, hair spun from twilight, Eros himself. And in that moment, a single tear of hot oil fell onto the god's shoulder. He awoke with a cry that shook the palace walls. You've betrayed me. Love cannot live where there is no trust." And with a sound like shattering stars, he vanished, taking the enchanted palace with him. Psyche stumbled through the wastelands, her bare feet leaving bloody prints upon the stones. The wind howled through her torn robes as she whispered Eros's name, but only the echoes answered. When her legs could carry her no further, she collapsed by the river's edge, her reflection staring back at her from the dark waters. Gone was the proud princess whose beauty rivaled the gods. In her place knelt a woman hollowed by grief, her eyes holding more sorrow than the river could hold water. Then the air shivered. A scent of roses, too sweet, too thick, flooded the riverbank, and there she stood, Aphrodite, her beauty a weapon, her smile sharper than any dagger. "Sort this," she commanded, gesturing to a mountain of seeds, barley and wheat and poppy all tangled together like the threads of a ruined tapestry. "Before sunset, or never see my son again." Psyche's hands trembled as she reached forward. Her fingers, raw and bleeding, moved clumsily at first, scattering more seeds than she gathered. The sun crept across the sky, and despair coiled in her chest like a serpent. But then the earth itself took pity. From between the stones emerged an army of tiny black ants, their bodies gleaming like polished onyx. They moved in perfect lines, each seed lifted and carried to its rightful place. Barley with barley, wheat with wheat, poppy with poppy. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the task was done, and Psyche, kneeling in the dust, understood even the smallest creatures remember kindness. Aphrodite was not done with her cruelties. "Now," the goddess said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey, "fetch me golden fleece from the sheep that grazed by the river of death." These were no ordinary sheep, children. These were monsters forged from nightmares, their massive bodies corded with muscle, their curved horns sharper than any warrior's blade. Their yellowed teeth gnashed constantly, hungry for flesh, and their hooves tore the earth with every step. Even the grass withered where they grazed. Psyche crept to the riverbank, her breath shallow as a mouse's heartbeat. The beasts snorted and pawed the ground, their red eyes scanning for intruders. One false move, one snapped twig, and they would reduce her to bones before she could scream. She crouched in the brambles, thorns biting into her skin as the sun bled across the sky. Then, just as despair began to coil around her heart, the reeds at the water's edge began to whisper, "Wait for twilight. When the monsters sleep, gather only what clings to the thorns." And so she did. As dusk painted the world in violet shadows, the terrible sheep folded their legs and slept standing, their ragged breathing like bellows in the quiet. Psyche moved like a shadow herself, plucking only the strands of golden fleece that had caught on the bramble thorns, each one glowing faintly in the dying light, warm as captured sunlight between her fingers. By morning, she returned to Aphrodite with arms full of this impossible treasure, the fleece softer than cloud wool and brighter than dawn. The goddess's face darkened, not with anger, children, but with something far more dangerous, grudging respect. Aphrodite's third test was the cruelest yet. With a smile like a dagger's edge, she thrust an empty flask into Psyche's hands. "Bring me water," she murmured, from the very falls where Styx herself drinks? Every soul in that firelit circle knew the horror of this task. The waters of Styx didn't merely kill, they erased. One drop could burn through flesh like acid, dissolve memory like morning mist. The falls roared ceaselessly in the deepest chasm of the underworld, their black spray freezing even the air around them. Psyche stood at that precipice, the flask slippery in her numb fingers. The crashing waters screamed like 1,000 lost voices. The spray struck her cheeks, not like water, but like liquid darkness, colder than a grave's embrace. Each droplet burned where it touched, leaving her skin mottled with phantom bruises. She stretched her arm out, when suddenly the light died. Great wings blotted out the sun, their shadow swallowing the entire gorge. The eagle she'd once found with a broken wing, the one she'd nursed for weeks with scraps of meat and careful bandages, plunged into the torrent without hesitation. The black waters raged around those mighty talons as they dipped the flask deep. When the eagle emerged, its feathers smoked with unnatural frost, one eye sealed shut by frozen spray, but the vessel brimmed with water darker than oblivion itself. Psyche cradled the flask like a newborn, watching the eagle limp into the sky. No words passed between them, none were needed. But the goddess saved her cruelest test for last. "Go to the underworld," she whispered sweetly, "and bring me Persephone's beauty in this casket." The air itself seemed to still at the horror of this final task, a journey no living soul had ever made and returned from. Yet Psyche, her hands shaken but her eyes dry, turned toward the path where sunlight died. Poor Psyche stood at the mouth of the underworld, that ivory casket cold in her hands. The path before her sloped down into darkness where no sensible creature would venture. But love makes fools of us all, doesn't it? She stepped forward, and the earth seemed to swallow her whole. The air grew thick, not with smoke, but with the breath of countless souls who'd walked this path before. Strange fungi glowed along the walls, their pale light just enough to see by. At the river, old Charon waited in his battered boat. When he held out his hand for payment, Psyche had nothing to give but a single tear. The ferryman studied it, this mortal girl's sorrow, then nodded once and let her pass. Persephone's garden wasn't what you'd imagine. No bright blooms here, just pale flowers growing in perfect rows, their petals the color of moonlight on snow. The queen herself sat weaving, her loom's steady click-clack, the only sound in that silent place. She took one look at Psyche and knew why she'd come. Without a word, she plucked a thread from her tapestry, shimmering like spider's silk, and sealed it in the casket. "Don't open it," she warned, "but the journey back is long, and temptation is a sly companion." Psyche stood at the edge of the living world, that ivory casket heavy in her hands. Persephone's warning echoed in her ears. Do not open it. But the path back was long, and the box seemed to whisper to her. With each step, the temptation grew. What harm could one glance do? She thought. Her fingers found the latch. The lid creaked open, and out rushed a sleep deeper than death itself. It filled her lungs like dark water, dragging her down into oblivion before she could even cry out. The casket tumbled from her limp fingers, rolling away into the dust. But love had been watching. Eros, who had followed her every step since she left the palace, saw her fall. His wings tore the air as he dove, catching her just before she struck the earth. cradling her against his chest, he brushed the hair from her face. Her skin already cold, her breath shallow as a winter stream. High above, the gods held their breath. Zeus, who had watched this mortal girl's trials with amusement, now sat forward on his throne. Aphrodite, sensing her son's anguish, appeared in a swirl of rose petals, but the sneer died on her lips when she saw his face. Eros did not beg, he did not rage, he simply held Psyche closer, his golden wings wrapping around her like a shield. And in that silence, even the goddess of love understood some bonds are stronger than pride. Now here's where the old stories disagree, children. Some say Aphrodite wept when she saw her son's broken face. Others claim she merely sighed, like a gardener watching a stubborn vine finally twist toward the sun. But all agree on this. When Eros raised his head to meet his mother's gaze, something in the air between them shifted. The sleep lifted from Psyche like morning fog. Her first breath was a gasp, sharp as a newborn's, and her eyes flew open to find herself cradled in golden wings. Eros's smile when she recognized him. Oh, that smile could have lit every hearth in Greece. But listen close, for this is the secret the bards forget. Immortality came not as a reward, but as a necessity. When Zeus offered the cup of ambrosia, it wasn't kindness that moved him. The fates themselves had whispered that a love like theirs couldn't be contained by mortal years. Their wedding feast lasted 40 days. The wine flowed from rivers, the bread rose without yeast, and even Hades emerged from his dark kingdom to dance. And Psyche, she wore her scars like jewelry, each one gilded by divine hands, each one a testament. As for Aphrodite, well, she still grumbles about mortals at her Olympian dinners. But when Psyche's first child was born, the goddess sent a blanket woven from sunset clouds. And that, my dears, is the closest you'll get to an apology from the likes of her. But hush now, the owls are calling, and old bones need rest. We'll speak of other wonders tomorrow. Until next time, this is Uncle Ben signing off. Take care, and may the gods watch over you.